Bondi Terrorism cover-up on this week's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 30th of July 2026. I'm Elisa Barwick, and joining me today is Citizens Party National Chairman Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa. I've got a big show today, and this issue of the Bondi cover-up is really important, especially because of what's coming up in Parliament. But it's really shameless how this is playing out. But I also want to mention, before we get started, people are going to start noticing some changes to the show. You might already notice them on our YouTube channel, right? We're rebadging the Citizens Report. We're soon going to become known as the Australian Alert Podcast. So just wait and see the changes that play out. But also, Elisa, we're going to be talking about some other important subjects. This dinner that Anthony Albanese had in what is it, Potts Point last week, has got a lot of attention.
Look who came to dinner.
Look who came to dinner. And we're going to look who else came to dinner, because it really tells you something about power in Australia. We're going to have a discussion about post offices, because they're at a do or die point, post offices in Australia, and there's a Senate inquiry people need to get involved in. And we also want to mention a friend of the show who's just passed away. We'll talk about him towards the end.
Yes, a remarkable Australian. So stay tuned for all of those topics. Straight into the first one though, Bondi Terrorism cover-up. Look, you know, it's not unknown for Royal Commissions to be cover-ups, that's for sure. But this is huge, you know, what has been becoming quite clear over recent weeks with the Royal Commission into the events leading up to Bondi. Of course, anti-Semitism, social cohesion is what it's badged as. But we want to make the point that Parliament is going to be sitting again in 2 weeks' time. And sometime from that point forward, the legislation will be tabled, which we've so far held at bay, and we've forced it to be even changed somewhat due to popular opposition. And that is the ASIO legislation, which would give ASIO the power to do what it does to suspected terrorists in terms of, you know, taking them aside, detaining them.
Interrogating them without rights. Exactly.
And they'd be able to do that to anybody, not even if you're not a suspect, but someone who they think might have relevant information. I mean,
on anything, not even way beyond terrorism. Just anything ASIO is interested
national security.
They can grab people and interrogate them.
So it's the drift that you see happening across the world to a police state.
Yep.
And there are parts of this legislation, I mean, it should be junked. We've had this legislation for a long time, but it's always been subject to being re-evaluated because of the sunset clause, and they wanted to get rid of that sunset clause so it was permanent.
Yep.
And we've at least changed that aspect of it. The government has agreed to give up trying to rid it of the sunset clause.
Yeah, our popular resistance achieved that.
So we do want people to pay attention to that topic and to continue to needle their politicians on this legislation. But to give you the impetus to do that, we want to talk about what has happened in the last week or so with the hearings of the Royal Commission. And that is that the government has blocked a visa for the fellow who would be a key witness.
I would say the key witness.
Yeah, the key witness on the subject that we raised right after this Bondi terrorist attack occurred.
Yep.
I mean, it was, a couple of days later.
Well, we record the show on a Thursday. The attack was on a Sunday, so 4 days after the attack, we raised it on this show.
Yeah, and we said, look, ASIO has been far too focused on foreign interference, not on terrorism. And the guy who we're talking about, who would be the key witness, a fellow by the name of Marcus, who was...
That's his code name.
Yeah. As identified as such on a Four Corners program in February, where he made stunning revelations He was an ex-ASIO agent, so
Yep.
he was working with the two perpetrators of the attack at Bondi, and the evidence that he would give at this Royal Commission would 100%, according to what he has been able to say publicly so far, prove what we said 4 days after that attack, that the focus of ASIO was distracted away from terrorism.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, the timing of us raising it, right? 4 days after the Royal Commission. So in early December or mid-December, we are saying what was then confirmed on Four Corners in early February, because Four Corners interviewed this ex-ASIO agent. Now, by agent, we mean there's a difference between an officer and an agent. An officer is paid by ASIO. He's like works for ASIO. An agent is otherwise known as an informer, right? So this particular person had infiltrated a pro-ISIS cell in Western Sydney, and his information to ASIO in 2019 is why ASIO conducted an investigation into the son, Naveed Akram, and for a couple of months actually, looked at this kid, scoped him out, and then concluded he wasn't a danger, partly based, Elisa, on the father, Sajid Akram's reassurance to ASIO that he, the father, wasn't radical, unlike the son, but he would sort of take control of him.
Keep an eye on him.
Keep an eye on him. The son was going to come and live in the house with the father, and the father would keep an eye on him. And ASIO accepted that reassurance, and everything was fine, except this agent, Marcus, said on Four Corners that he said to ASIO, hang on, the father is just as radical as the son. What are you talking about? So ASIO ignored that warning, and then the other explosive thing so we didn't know that in December, but what we said in December is what Marcus said next on Four Corners, which is that by 2022, he's still doing his job as an informer, taking the information to ASIO that here's this pro-ISIS element, and we've got to keep an eye on these guys. But he said ASIO changed its priorities. They redeployed the officers that he was informing to other areas, and the people that he was given to talk to, he said they didn't even know the names of ISIS identities, right? He was given, the T-boy, right, to talk to, essentially. Yep. And why? Because, and it actually started in 2019, the boss of ASIO then, Duncan Lewis, had given a speech where he said, foreign interference is a greater threat to Australia than terrorism, right? That's the headline on an ABC report about his speech. He was then replaced by Mike Burgess. And Mike Burgess, by the way, just as a quick aside here, even Michelle Grattan, the most experienced journalist in Australia probably, she's been in the press gallery for a century, sorry Michelle, but I'd say 60 or 70 years, right? She's she described, I looked this up, she described Mike Burgess a few years ago when she was writing about him as basically what, she didn't say this, but I'm going to use this term, a publicity whore, which is really strange for the boss of a secret intelligence agency. These people you're not supposed to know. Yeah. They're supposed to do their job in the shadows, right? But Mike Burgess started running this line about foreign interference in Australia. Foreign interference, that's the threat, foreign interference. And he was giving speeches at the Lowy Institute, like he would, every year he would do this threat assessment speech he instituted, and it's a circus every year. The boss of ASIO does the threat assessment speech. And of course, he's not stupid enough to say terrorism is not an issue anymore, but it's what he chooses to emphasise. That's the important thing, right? And he was emphasising foreign interference. And so you've got an agent saying, well, hang on, I was informing to this agency about these people who then went on and commit this terrorist attack, and I was getting a response from people who are saying, well, that's not our main priority anymore. Yeah. And that's the guy the government's blocked. Yeah,
and so these two, the Akrams, were on the ASIO watch list. They're on the relevant New South Wales Police Force watch list. They're acquiring guns.
Yep. So and ASIO is not sharing information with the New South Wales Police that the New South Wales Police could have used to deny the gun application.
Yeah. And so while all this is going on, What was ASIO focused on? Was this foreign interference issue important enough to distract their attention?
All right, let's, for argument's sake, agree with ASIO that foreign interference is a real problem. In 2018, the Parliament passed a law called the Espionage and Foreign Interference Act, right? So let's say it was a real problem. Now, we're told that the source of foreign interference, the threat of foreign interference is coming from mainly one place, we're told, which is China. That's the understanding out there. Though I will point out there was this famous one of show pony Mike Burgess's threat assessment speeches in about 2022 or 2023. He actually talked about a nest of spies in Australia that ASIO had uncovered, and for 2 years everyone thought he was talking about Chinese spies. 2 years later he said, "Oh no, I was talking about India." Now, bear in mind, 2 weeks ago the Prime Minister of India was in Melbourne at Marvel Stadium before 30,000 screaming fans who are part of an Indian political party in Australia, and our Prime Minister was there to bathe in that adulation. The Liberals were there, so all the Labor ministers were there, all the Liberal ministers were there to bathe in that adulation. This is from a country that Mike Burgess himself said had a nest of spies in Australia. Believe it or not, Elisa, ASIO has not found the equivalent of that from China, but it let everyone believe that China was the issue. And the reason I'm highlighting the China stuff is because this focus on foreign interference, this dangerous foreign interference, and we're accepting it is, has led to count them, three charges. And at no time has it led to any espionage charges. Now, espionage is a no crime. That's been a crime on the books for a century, ever, right? If you got caught as a spy, you get charged, right? You used to get executed. At no time when they've been talking about Chinese spies and foreign interference, has anyone ever been charged with espionage. They passed a law to define this new thing called foreign interference, and that's led to 3 charges. In the 10 years or so, or 8 years that they've had the law, that's led to 3 charges. Let's go through them. And Richard Barden and I covered this a few months ago, but I wanted to repeat them again because the viewer needs to decide, do these warrant the same attention from ASIO as keeping an eye on people known to it who went on to become terrorists, right? So, the first charge, a gentleman in Melbourne who was a Vietnamese Australian, but he's ethnically Chinese. So he came to Australia from Vietnam back in the 70s. His name's Sonny Duong. He'd been a Liberal Party candidate at one stage, this guy. In COVID, he donated $37,450 to the Royal Children's Hospital, and he asked for his local Member of Parliament, Alan Tudge, to be there to accept the cheque, the big, novelty cheque.
Yeah.
For that, he was found guilty of preparing for an act of foreign interference because he had been tapped saying, "Oh, this is going to be good for us Chinese." This kind of, giving a donation to the hospital via a politician, preparing for an act of foreign interference, and he was spent over a year in jail. He's recently got out, right? That's one case. The only case that's actually gone to jail. That's one case. The second charge, there's only 3. The second charge is there's a gentleman in Sydney named Alexander Zergo. He was in China. He was approached by a couple of people who used sort of English names. I forget their names. They're kind of funny when you hear them. Like, it's equivalent of being in a Chinese restaurant in China and 2 Chinese people come up to you and say, "We're Jack and Jill," something like that, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, they said to him, "We'd like to pay you money to give us information about Australia." Now, the actual real story with this Zergo case is he scammed them because he went online, downloaded off Wikipedia or something, sheets of information about Australia, gave it to them and accepted the money. He has been charged, and he talked about how he had he talked up some link to Kevin Rudd to make it see, which he doesn't have any link to Kevin Rudd, he just said he did. So he's been charged with foreign interference for that, right? That's the second case. The third case is 3 people have been arrested in Canberra, and they were arrested for making inquiries about a Buddhist group in Canberra. And they didn't really hide the fact they were making inquiries. Now, this Buddhist group, and if Richard Barden was here, he'd remember the name. I can't remember it offhand. But this is actually a group that is sort of universally in the Buddhist world regarded as a cult, right? So it's run by a sort of like a flamboyant, charismatic individual, right, who sort of uses the trappings of Buddhism to promote a certain thing. You would sort of compare it to Scientology. So just say that, Scientology is, you either love or hate Scientology, right? That's got a bad reputation among some quarters, if you're not Tom Cruise. So you can watch documentaries about it. Just say an American who hates Scientology came to Australia and made inquiries about a local branch of Scientology here. That is essentially what these Chinese people did, because they don't like this organisation. The guy who runs it does things like encouraging its members not to go and get medical treatment, right? And so it is viewed very dimly back in China for that reason. Anyway, so they make inquiries about it. They got arrested for making those inquiries on the basis that some of what they did was coordinated with people in China who also don't like that organisation, right? So they made inquiries, they got arrested. This is all based on ASIO's surveillance. When this was taken to the magistrate in the ACT, right, to charge them, the magistrate actually said, "I fail to see what law has been broken." That's what he said, right? So those are the three cases. So just think about that for a minute. Let's accept that it's serious. Foreign interference is serious. Assuming that it is serious, if those are the only three cases that have resulted in charges, does that in any way justify elevating an obsession with foreign interference over ASIO's day job of counter-terrorism? Right, where they knew the people who committed this attack. These people were able to accumulate an arsenal of weapons, travel to at least two known terrorist training spots. One in the Philippines, they flew to Uzbekistan, which is a backdoor into Afghanistan. Travel to two, right? And ASIO's ignoring all this. They got an agent saying to them that the father is as radical as the son, and ASIO is ignoring all of this, and then Bondi is allowed to happen, and that's the agency that we're awarding powers to, Elisa, not holding to account, and now the government has blocked the visa of that agent who would come and tell his even more information potentially than that. The information I've told you is what he was prepared to say on Four Corners, or Four Corners was prepared to air. He would have protection at the Royal Commission to say everything, and they've blocked his visa.
Yeah. So, you have to ask some seminal questions here, because here is the Albanese government. Essentially what they're doing is covering for ASIO's failures. And when you understand what ASIO is, it's no longer its own species. It's a seamless part of the Five Eyes intelligence alliance with the United States, with the UK, with Canada and New Zealand. So that body is calling the shots here to say, protect us, don't let this witness in. One way or the other, whoever gave the order, that's the top-down arrangement that's being exercised and flexed here.
And I'm glad you mentioned the Five Eyes, because you wrote an article in the Alert this week about an aspect of the ISIS brides scandal that people would be absolutely flabbergasted if they knew, which was that Five Eyes agencies were involved in actually helping recruit young women to be ISIS brides and get them into Syria.
That's right. And there's a case that we wrote about, which we'll put link the article below so that you can read the details. But Shamima Begum is the case in point, where she's now stateless. She's still in a refugee camp in Syria and has been prevented from returning home to the UK, where she was born and raised. Now, governments can't leave a person stateless by international law, but they cited the fact that her parents being born in Bangladesh gave her the right to claim or to apply for Bangladeshi citizenship. That doesn't mean you get it, and in fact the government of Bangladesh had denied it. But there's no recourse left in UK law. She's pursuing this with European authorities in terms of the protections offered by the European Convention on Human Rights. But this has obvious implications for anybody, as we've cited with a number of, including a Australian-born professor who's been a naturalised UK citizen for 20 years, saying, well, look, if they can do that to her, they can do that to anyone whose parents were born outside of Britain. So that, has big implications for anyone anywhere.
People have got to be really careful with this bandwagon about stopping them coming in, because it damages the rights for all of us. But in this particular case, Canadian intelligence, which is part of Five Eyes, actually, this is she was 15 when she was recruited, which means she's younger than the legal age in Australia she was younger than the legal age in Australia now to be on social media.
That's right.
So she was recruited by groomers, essentially, right? But she was facilitated into Syria by Canadian intelligence.
That's right.
And this is a huge scandal. Canadian intelligence is a partner of our ASIO agency, right? And there's, when you've got a situation where the former head of Al-Qaeda is now the president of Syria, he's being feted by Donald Trump, embraced by Donald Trump, embraced by the British government. The new representative of Syria to the United States is the former spokesman for Al-Qaeda. There was a Western journalist has just published her interviews back when he was the spokesman for Al-Qaeda with this guy who's now walking around Washington, right, bold as brass. Al-Qaeda was a sister organisation for ISIS. This is such a murky area that this denial of a visa to Marcus is just the tip of the iceberg. They are trying to put they do not want the public to look at what intelligence agencies did in relation to actual terrorist networks and what they might actually be implicated in. So they're covering it up here, and that fact alone should make every Australian reject emphatically that this agency deserves more powers. We should be putting a spotlight on everything they do and taking away half their powers, right, and have a total reform of the agencies. So bear that in mind. In a couple of weeks' time, like you said, Parliament's coming back. Our work so far has postponed this ASIO bill from passing, but take the next 2 weeks to, if you haven't made calls yet or haven't made calls for a while, call your senators, especially the coalition ones, and say, don't you dare pass this law, this ASIO bill.
And we'll put the link below where you can find out how to make those calls and send emails. Please do like, share, subscribe, and make a comment below. Help us get this show circulating so more people can find out about this. And also, here's how you can find out more from our publication.
The narrow agendas of mainstream media outlets are not telling you the full story. The weekly Citizens Party Australian Alert provides in-depth insights into issues that matter to all Australians. The Australian Alert holds a mirror to those in the halls of power, reporting on issues of national importance that are being buried by the major parties. It's reported on the misconduct of banks and major corporates, the persecution of those doing their jobs, and the failure of regulators to do theirs. Economic coverage puts real issues on the political agenda. There's serious analysis of global issues, the Washington Insiders Report, and the global threat from endless wars. Everything you should know every week is in the Australian Alert. Subscribe today for hard copy and digital versions.
Look who also came to the power dinner. Okay, now we're talking about the dinner that our Prime Minister, Mr Albanese, attended at Mandalay Mansion in Point Piper in Sydney, hosted by the 25-year-old Felix Lee, who is the son of a Chinese-born billionaire, Philip Dongfang Lee, a casino whale who has been investigated by the ATO regarding offshore money transfers, suspected money laundering, suspicion of dishonestly transferring money from China into Australia.
Well, people should know China has what's called capital controls. You can only take $50,000 US out of China. So when you hear about this big money that comes out of China, there's usually a dodgy explanation, and in this particular case, suspected money laundering. I mean, I just can't see any other explanation. He splurged $2.2 or $2.3 billion through the Star Casino in 2 years, and he lost $57 million there, right? Which qualifies him to be a whale. Lost. That was the fee for them laundering his money, right, to become this big player in the Australian property market.
Yeah. Now, so this was a fundraising dinner for the Labor Party, hosted at this prestigious location. The donation that was on the table from the Lee, or Felix Lee, let's say.
25-year-old son.
Originally it was said to be $1 million, then it was revised in the media accounts at anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million. But even if it was the lower amount, that was a preliminary instalment. You could say.
Tanya Plibersek claimed it wasn't $1 million. I thought what she said was damage control. To be honest, I would imagine it probably is more in the ballpark of $1 million. I think just before we go on, because what we wanted to talk about in this segment is who else was there.
Yeah, no, right? That's right.
But people should see that we've got to say this. So during the show this year, we've been critical more than once about the relationship between One Nation and Gina Rinehart. Not that we're alleging anything about Gina Rinehart, except we're just making the point. Do the Australian people accept you'll only get somewhere in politics if you're backed by billionaires, right? In other words, do billionaires control the game? And if that's the case, we're not a real democracy. We're what you call a plutocracy, right? And One Nation has been criticised by especially the Labor Party. They've been very critical of Pauline taking money from Gina Rinehart, right? They've been critical because we'll talk about their hypocrisy in a second. We haven't been critical for that reason. We're just saying, if you want, everyone hates the uni party. The uni party is the uni party because it's controlled by private interests, right? These big corporate interests. If you want a change, the change has to be different. The alternative has to be different. Our party, merging now with Gerard Rennick's People First Party into the Australian People's Party, we are genuinely different. Gerard turned down money from a billionaire, right, for his party, that's our main criticism, right? That's it. Labor Party though piled on, right? Because Gina's a mining magnate, that somehow makes her money illegitimate, right? She's a mining magnate. There's this sort of inner city soy latte sipping, tut. Everyone, all these people who literally sit at the pinnacle of the benefits of our industrial economy hate the source of our industrial economy, hate the industry that makes up, that puts them at the pinnacle of that, right? They just hate it all. So anyway, they carry on like chooks with their head cut off. Somehow she's illegitimate. But they are damn hypocrites. They are. So before this guy, it was Anthony Pratt. Labor has its own billionaire. His name's Anthony Pratt, right? Now they got a second one, this Lee family, and they are so dodgy in the way that they explain this. Now, the other week we talked about Sam Dastyari did this interview 4 years ago about donations and taking donations. And I tell you what, he laid it all out there. Just how he was open about how corrupt it is. It's an arms race between the major parties. See who can raise the most money from the biggest donors, right? So they can outspend each other, right? And they'll do anything for donations. Well, insiders asked Albo on Sunday when he was in Adelaide about this meeting, and his answer, his response is just shameful. Anyway, have a look.
I want to ask you, PM, about the reports in the Nine newspapers over recent days about a private fundraising dinner. Firstly, did you attend a dinner at the home of Felix Lee in Point Piper?
Oh, look, I attend lots of functions.
What about this one?
I attend lots of functions in lots of places, including last night right here.
What about this dinner at Point Piper?
I attend lots of functions in
lots of places. Why do you want to answer that?
Well, I do. You've just said that that occurred. That's fine. I attend lots of dinners in lots of places, and I don't talk about private dinners. I've held a number this week here in Adelaide as well. I attended a dinner last night with 750 people.
I'm not asking about that.
But they're the facts, David. I attend a lot of meetings, functions with lots of people. We're transparent about it. I do attend a lot of events, and that is part of the process that occurs engaging with people.
That's as dodgy, this guy's our Prime Minister. Sorry, there is no moral authority. They want to. This is a problem with Labor. They look for every way to look like they're morally superior. They are not.
No.
They are not the party that fought for the working man anymore. They are the big end of town, and we're about to prove it more.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's not a man who has nothing to hide, right?
No.
So the question is, as we said, who came to this dinner? Who was at the table? And
much so that we're starting to suspect that the people, the Felix Lee and Philip Lee part, might be the distraction.
Absolutely. Although just to say that Felix Lee is the major investor in this neobank called In One Bank, which was closed. He closed it after interventions by the regulator. We won't go into the whole story, but so there is that connection, because what was curious to us when we heard in dribs and drabs from various news reports, and who knows if the full list of who was there has been published, I suspect probably not. But it was a cosy little gathering of what the Australian Financial Review, who would know, called the cream of the financial elite. So it included Commonwealth Bank CEO Matt Comyn, ex-Future Fund boss David Murray.
And also ex-Commonwealth Bank CEO.
That's exactly, very important.
Yep.
Ex and Liberal Treasurer Joe Hockey, former ASIC Chair James Shipton, HSBC's former Australian CEO Anthony Shaw, and former Victorian Premier Dan Andrews. So it is a curious bunch, and I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear, because there's been no reporting, as you would expect, that I've come across, at least in the media, to say what they were talking about. What did they want the Prime Minister's ear about specifically? But there's one thing one thread running through all of those people, and that is, well, predominantly banking.
Bankers. Well, let's go through them just quickly. But first of all, we'll dispense with Dan Andrews. I need to say that people have known our party for a long time now. We've been very outspoken on issues to do with China. But our position is very simple. We don't want war with China, and we should have a good relationship with our biggest trading partner. That's it. People, though, in the major parties, they're all over this China relationship until they weren't, because there was money to be made, right? They got these people. They're just greedy opportunists, right? And Dan Andrews is showing that he's one of them. He's in the business of making money from China. Anyway, so that might have been why he was there. Put him aside.
If he shows up on a board of a bank, sooner or later we'll raise it again.
That's right. But let's look at the rest of them. Here you got this coterie of bankers and Joe Hockey. Joe Hockey, because this is what we really want to get into. Joe Hockey was the treasurer who in 2000, when he was shadow treasurer in 2009, about 4 months after the global financial crisis erupted in September 2008, Joe Hockey gets up there and pontificates in Parliament and says, if there's one thing we've learned, Mr. Speaker, it's that government should not be involved in banking. Now, that was like the high watermark of this ideology from the people who privatised the Commonwealth Bank and exposed us only to private banks in Australia, right? He saw that was the high watermark. He expressed that ideology where you could twist the global financial crisis to blame some kind of government role in banking when there is none, right? Essentially, there is none. So this guy is a stooge for bankers. His wife was a bigwig at one of the, which one was that? UBS or something, I think. Deutsche. His wife, that's right. His wife was a huge wheel at Deutsche Bank. So this was what the real story is. Albo sits down with bankers. Right, that's the real story, and it makes you wonder if someone suggested this guy Felix Lee come along to be the distraction from the fact that the Prime Minister of Australia is sitting down with the most powerful bankers in Australia.
Yeah.
Matt Comyn is the guy who's running the Commonwealth Bank now to gouge us all. David Murray was the guy in charge of the Commonwealth Bank when it was privatised and introduced the model of gouging us all. And why is this so relevant? Because we have fought so hard for a national bank in Australia, bring back a public bank. Our Prime Minister, Elisa, 2 years ago, expressed his own support for a public bank. He said he would never privatise the Commonwealth Bank. We handed them a public bank solution on a platter as the solution to the regional bank closures crisis, right? It was recommended by a Senate inquiry and it hit a wall. What's the wall? The wall is the guy who professes he actually likes the idea of a public bank and would never privatise the Commonwealth Bank sits down with these people who say to him, no, you will not. That's the wall.
Yep.
So we know these were who was also at dinner. Who wasn't at dinner? The Australian people.
Yeah, now the other aspect of this is, you know, these are the places where policy is made,
Really,
right?
yeah.
In the hallways, in the dinners, and I wanted to raise the conference of the Labor Party in Adelaide in that context because that's all it comprised. As everyone that's seen any reporting of this knows, nothing real was discussed on the party
Albanese
floor.
suppressed all dissent and they used it as a fundraising opportunity.
That's right. And the big end of town had privileged access to meeting with ministers, from cabinet ministers on down. So there were 36 ministers or so, and they held over 40 meetings in 2.5 days. And these meetings were with corporate executives and lobbyists who paid, in the case of one meeting, which was the Federal Labor Business Exchange. So this was a sidelines meeting held outside of the official forum. They paid $12,000 a head. And mind you, these are people who have already paid a minimum of $33,000 a head to be members of a Labor forum that allows them to even get an invitation to pay that $12,000 to sit down with those ministers. Albanese himself apparently attended at least 5 dinner functions in 2.5 days, so that's
one of the reasons.
Too many dinners.
That's one of the reasons they're justifying his answer to insiders, to David Spears, right? As if.
Yeah. So, and interestingly enough, you know, one of the things that did, because we've all heard the stories about Ed Husick trying to get a debate up about Gaza on the floor. That was rejected, even though he had ample support to have that debate. So none of those debates occurred. But one of the things that was interesting was that the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union put out a blueprint for action which called for, I'll read it out under the headline Public Banking, the establishment of a state-owned bank to provide basic, low-fee financial services and to finance critical public infrastructure projects.
So, and the AMWU, despite Labor's best efforts to micromanage this conference, they sort of forced this kind of thing to be talked about. They went there with a manifesto saying, hey, we're going to talk about this. And good on them, they'd included a public bank. Now, I mean, the Murdoch, they also had proposals to change the flag and whatever, but, you know, so the Murdoch media highlights one thing, right? This is far more substantial because, Elisa, we put out a statement saying, hang on, there's a real emerging consensus here. That's why the Prime Minister has to have a dinner at Potts Point with the most powerful bankers. They've got to keep him in line, because if he doesn't absolutely lie about absolutely everything, and he does have this personal view that we shouldn't have privatised the Commonwealth Bank, there's a groundswell. So now the AMWU, one of the bigger unions in support of the Labor Party, right, and you can add to that other unions like the CWU, or the CEPU, right, which is another, the electrical union, which is another one. They support a public bank. A lot of political parties support a public bank. Of course, the number one is us, Citizens Party for 30 years. And a lot of people are jumping on this bandwagon now because of the relentless work we've done for 30 years to promote a public bank, right? It's now come back into vogue in a certain sense, and people are saying, yeah, okay, no, you're right, we do need that idea. So there's us. Gerard Rennick's People First Party was founded on this idea, and that's why we're joining forces with Gerard. You've got the Greens. That's in their policy to bring back a public bank. Thanks, and they were one of the first parties to sort of jump on our bandwagon. You've got, well, it was the current leader of the National Party, Matt Canavan. He's the current leader of the party. He's the one who made it the second recommendation of the Senate inquiry into bank closure. He said the government should look at a public bank, right? And I know other people in the National Party support it. Backbenchers in the Labor Party support it. I've spoken to them. I know their names, right? I know who they are. They well and truly support it because they know this was originally their party's policy. We've got a list here in the alert. When Fatima Payman started her political party, she's ex-Labor, of course, they come up with a list of policy for the election. What do they include in it? In Australia's Voice, a national bank. You've got lobby groups for small business. Now, the umbrella group COSBOA, Council of Small Business Organisations in Australia, it supports a public bank. Their licensed post office group, we'll talk more about them in a second, they support a public bank. You've got think tanks and quite prominent ones. Per Capita, which is one that's associated with the Labor Party, it supports a public bank. The very well-known Australia Institute, the part that's out there talking about gas a lot of the time, etc., it supports a public bank. And the new insurgent political party on the scene, One Nation, its second most senior senator, Malcolm Roberts, supports a public bank. He advocated for a People's Bank a few weeks ago, got smashed in the Financial Review for saying so. We covered it on the show here. And the other well-known Australian political identity, the father of the house, Bob Katter, he was the only politician in all the years they went with this consensus that government should not be involved in banking. He was there in Parliament the whole time, and he was for many years inside Parliament the lone voice for a public bank, like we were the lone voice outside of Parliament for a public bank, right? And so Katter and his party absolutely support a public bank as well. This is quite an emerging consensus, and that's why these bankers, right? Let's hypothesize. Matt Common calls up and David Murray saying, "Hey, you seen this? Oh man, we better get Albo and bring him into line here. Oh, but how can we do it undercover? It'll leak. We'll invite a Chinese guy along."
Well, this is our conspiracy, at least.
That's our conspiracy theory. Don't take it too seriously, but the part that's serious is the bankers don't want this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you think about, you can read more in this alert, as you can each week, about the global financial situation, which, look, 2008 was not the end of financial crises, it was the beginning. And since then, everything that governments across the world have done, generally at instructions of international authorities, financial authorities such as the Bank for International Settlements, etc., that the central banks all adhere to, have done things that have made it worse. They've bailed things out, and they've made some attempts superficially to make banks put up more capital and things like that. But the banks, of course, as they always do, find a way between the wallpaper and the wall, and they come up with new, more complicated ways to do things. So, we've spotlighted this week the private credit bubble. You can talk about the AI bubble. There's plenty of examples. And as all that starts to cave in on itself, as it most assuredly will, public banking there's going to be a massive upsurge. So we are foreshadowing that the existing neoliberal economic consensus is going to be deep sixed, and in its place you're going to have an emerging, and you do already have an emerging economic consensus on public banking, and the support for it is already wide.
The fight is going to be either the big banks use their power to get governments to just prop them up again, right, for their profit and their benefit.
Yes.
And so they keep their power. Or we have the people say, no, that's not the government's role. The government should have its own bank that serves the people. Yeah. That's what the fight's going to be.
Now, to give you a sense of the spirit of that undertaking, that we're absolutely dedicated to bringing about the latter of those options, I want to play a segment of an interview that the head of People First Party and the incoming president of the People's Party, Gerard Rennick, did with Mark Bouris. And this is a little segment where he talks about how the government can create the credit to build a nation in very concrete terms of the kind of how that would roll out across the nation and the impact that it would have. So this is just a few minutes.
What we want is our big kicker with the monetary policy is we want an infrastructure bank. So we want to fund our own infrastructure through quantitative easing in a productive manner. We were told at university that it's irresponsible for governments to print money out of thin air. Now, that is 50% correct. If you print and spend, that is bad. Inflation is a relative number between demand and supply.
Yep.
If you print and spend, increase demand, that's wrong.
Yep.
But here's the thing, if you print and build and increase the supply of power stations, increase the supply of dams, you're actually going to deal with the structural imbalances of this country. Because one of the problems we've got ever since the Tasmanian dam decisions in 83 is that state governments can't build regional infrastructure because the inner city greenies stop it from being built, and they come in over the top through the federal government to stop it. But what we want to do, in the same way, if I said to you that I was going to bring in a private bill, I was still a senator, I'm going to bring in a private bill to stop BHP from issuing new shares on the stock market to build a coal mine that was going to generate a 15% return on equity, you'd think I was stupid, wouldn't you? You'd go, there's nothing wrong with BHP issuing new shares out of thin air, provided they're building an asset that's going to generate a return. Governments can do the same thing, provided they match it with, you understand, secured loans versus unsecured loans. They build infrastructure, profit centre infrastructure, dams, power stations, toll roads, ports, airports, telecommunications. Okay, all of those assets make money. And what you do is, toll roads is a classic example. Sydney today, 5 million people paying $10 a toll. In 100 years' time, it'll be 10 million people paying $100 a toll, right? It's just a money-making machine. Why on earth would you privatise your toll roads, right? They're natural monopolies anyway. So what we want to do is we will issue one new share and call it untapped wealth, set up an infrastructure bank in Canberra. That money will then lend bonds or issue infrastructure bonds to state governments to build those profit centre infrastructure assets, okay, and they have 50 years to repay the debt. Now, in the case of, say, you build a dam for $1 billion, you won't just issue the state government $1 billion. It might take 4 years to build. So you'll issue the state government $5 million for 200 weeks to build the dam. But here's the thing, 30% of that's going to come straight back to Canberra in taxes in the first week, and the other 70% of the money is going to spin through the economy, paying people to build things, right? And we can do that because where does the ingredients for the dam come from? It comes from the water out of the sky. We don't pay the clouds for it to rain. We don't pay the sun to give us that sunshine. If I drop a bull in a paddock with 20 cows and come back a year later, I've got 20 calves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's coming from Mother Nature. Mother Nature gives us this recurring wealth, and that's why we can justify it. But the key thing is you've got to match your credit as you expand because what we do today is we expand our credit on this side of the balance sheet, the standard balance sheet. We do it through foreign debt. We should do it through domestic equity. And then the reason being that when you make profits here from these assets, it comes back as dividends to our children.
And Elisa, that's otherwise an excellent podcast. We'll put the link below. People should go and watch that.
The whole lot,
The Mark Burris podcast with Gerard Rennick. It's it's one of the best things he's ever done.
Yeah, so take the time to do that. And just on another topic, we want to talk about it's do or die for post offices. This is very important, and we've put out an email alert today to urge people to make a submission on this topic by the 7th of August. So this is regarding the Senate inquiry into the Australia Post retail network. This was an inquiry that was called after a secret plan to shut down post offices and postal agencies was leaked to a Liberal senator.
Yep.
So these are plans by Australia Post to basically sabotage their own network.
Which we've been calling out anyway without having anything leaked to us because we've just been watching it, right? Christine Holgate was replaced as CEO by this guy, Paul Graham. And he was a Woolies executive, and he brought with him some, Subway and McDonald's executives, right? And they're told, here, you're in charge of Australia Post now, make a profit. And all they know to make a profit is not provide a service, it's shut it down. And so there were 4,350 odd post offices when they took it over. There's now barely over 4,100, so they've closed over 200 post offices. They've said they're taking it down to 4,000. So the buffer of over 100, 4,100. There's 100 or more post offices on the chopping block. Absolutely, they've said they're going to do it. They have lobbied the government to remove the restriction that says you've got to keep 4,000 post offices. They're trying to get that changed so they can close thousands more. There's 2/3 of the post offices in Australia called licensed post offices. They're small businesses run by mum and dad investors. They can barely make money, these things, because Australia Post rigs the payments, etc. Right, to make life real. These are people who think, how could you lose money franchising to a government business. How could you lose money? Seriously. So, and to understand how important they are, Elisa, they're the single biggest stakeholders in Australia Post, because collectively, these licensees have invested over $3 billion into the business that provides our postal services, right? And so they get hardly any serious return for that. And they either, if they're not going out of business, they're retiring because they can't on-sell the business because it's lost its value. And when that happens, Australia Post is doing nothing to replace those post offices, right? And so country towns around Australia are starting to lose post offices as well, not just city post offices. And this is a disaster happening in front of our eyes, and it's a total scandal. And one of the problems is the government sits on its hands because it says, oh, we corporatised Australia Post and it's supposed to function commercially, which means also independently. No, you are the shareholder. Well, the Australian people own Australia Post. Our shares are held by the government. There's two shareholder ministers, the communications minister and the finance minister, holding our shares in Australia Post for us. Any company in the world, any private company is controlled by its shareholders. Yes, you appoint CEOs, but you have a board that represents the shareholders and they tell the CEO and the executives what to do, right? So here's what you have to do. And if they're not doing it, they'll sack them. And what we're saying is that's what the government should be doing, but instead they're sitting on their hands and going, oh, they're making these decisions for valid commercial reasons. No, they're destroying our service. So this is one of those times when the Australian people, it's do or die. There's 7 days left, but if you're watching this on Friday night, there's 7 days, Friday next week, the 8th of August, you've got to have or 7th of August, sorry, Friday the 7th of August, put in a submission. It can just be a few lines on an email, right? Or it can be a proper submission about how valuable the post office is. We, the Citizens Party, we've long said that one part of the solution, it's not the total solution, Australia Post has got to be run better as the total solution, but one part of the solution is if we had a public bank, these things could complement, the public post office and the public bank could complement each other. You'd set up the public bank as a proper bank, right? But kick out the private banks from Australia Post that are just exploiting it, and Australia Post can also, the post offices can be the branch, the initial branch network for the public bank, right? And you can get full banking services in all post offices, and the revenue that the bank makes will be shared with post offices, right? And that will help make it financially viable as well. Also, Australia Post should take over cash distribution in Australia, because especially in the regional areas, it's so much, there's all this hand-wringing over cash distribution. There's an inquiry going into that as well. By the way, a quick aside, at the cash distribution hearing last week, Peter Fox from the Lynn Fox Company, who owns the cash distribution monopoly now, Armaguard, he actually said something quite revealing. He said, we're really surprised cash use has gone up. We didn't expect that. So our campaign with people like Dale Webster and Cash Welcome, Jason Bryce of Cash Welcome, etc., Martin North, to promote cash use in Australia is working. And they're being quite surprised over that. But the banks complain, oh, it's too expensive to get around. Well, let Australia Post get it around. They've got the best logistics system in Australia. They can get it around and make sure it's available everywhere it's needed. And it really is, with proper proactive intervention by government, we can save this service. But these neoliberal idiots who are in government, who just look for any excuse not to take responsibility for anything, they need the Australian people to kick them up the butt, right? And that's why you need to make a submission. Just send an email or make a big one, but please make one. You've got to make one by the 7th of August, so that the politicians, if they see a flood of submissions, if they see hundreds and hundreds coming in, they'll know, this is a serious issue.
It's a numbers game, so please do that as soon as you finish watching. Now, before our final segment, which I urge you to stay tuned for, here's how you can join us.
You deserve a future where the people, not entrenched power, determines Australia's direction. That's why you should join the Citizens Party. You need post offices and regional bank branches to remain open. A government that invests in people, not submarines that will never arrive. And a foreign policy that's in our national interest. We've stopped the cash ban legislation and led the fight to hold major banks to account. Tens of thousands of Australians have signed our petitions, and it's made a real difference. It's time for action as we push towards our goal of 10,000 members. Join the Citizens Party at citizensparty.org.au and be part of the movement that's shaping Australia's future.
Farewell to a remarkable Australian, Bevan Ramsden.
Elisa, Bevan is a friend of the Citizens Party, nearly 90. He was at the outside the Labor Party conference in Adelaide on the weekend. The Independent and Peaceful Australia Network held their own event about AUKUS and the submarines deal, which is, by the way, it's just increasingly imploding, the whole AUKUS thing. But anyway, so we've been part of putting the pressure of trying to get attention, scrutiny and transparency for AUKUS. Bevan is someone who, from his teenage years, was a peace activist in Australia. And I've only got to meet him in the last few years, but he loved our party. He he thought we were great. We did debate. The only thing he disagreed with was our support for nuclear power, but we had good debates over that. What I liked, one of the pleasures I've had in politics, having been in it for 33 years, starting as a young man myself, and you weren't that old when you started too, if I can say that. We've been in it together for a long time. Is I've been able to meet people, elderly people, who I think are like a portal into history. They live the history that I've read about in books, right? And those included, I got to work quite closely with Malcolm Fraser in his final years. Jim Cairns, the Whitlam treasurer, who was the Deputy Prime Minister in those days. I got to meet with him because he supported the public bank, and I got to work. We got to work closely with him. He loved our party too. Jim Cairns organised these Vietnam War moratorium marches, and they were really instrumental in changing Australian foreign policy back in the late 60s and early 70s. His lieutenants included Bevan Ramsden. Bevan Ramsden was a real activist for that.
Yeah, so Bevan, just to situate it, he was a telecommunications engineer, and his first job was at the Postmaster General's department.
PMG.
But then he became a TAFE teacher and a member of the New South Wales Teachers Federation. But obviously, as you're about to develop, became increasingly political.
Yeah, and he just kept it up for 70 years. He's someone who was he's a gentle guy, right? Not a rabble-rouser, but someone who was motivated by his deep love for people, right? And if you really love people, you hate things like war, right? And you want to make sure, there is such a thing as a just war sometimes, which basically means if you're defending yourself from attack, but we've been involved in too many that have not been just wars, right? And it's really important to have a peace movement in Australia. He was a great guy. I'm really honoured to have been able to get to know him in the last few years. So he died suddenly of a heart attack, I think, straight after this conference in Adelaide. He'll be sorely missed.
Yeah. So I wanted you to highlight, though, the story of the Vietnam moratorium campaigns and the peaceful rallies, just to give people a picture of what he led.
What was really amazing about the Vietnam War moratorium marches in Melbourne is how peaceful they were. This was a time of extreme turmoil, right? They weren't just opposing the war, they were opposing conscription. The feelings were really high. Jim Cairns was a very calm, measured kind of person, right? Very gently spoken person. And so was Bevan. And they were like, the peacefulness of these marches reflected the temperament of the people who organised them, right? Bevan was, he told me how he thought it was always funny that at the time he was derided in one of the newspapers as a Sunday school teacher from Bentley, right? Had been so instrumental in organising something as big as the Vietnam War moratorium marches.
But that's what leadership is, ordinary people standing by their principles and fighting for them in a dignified manner. And we thank Bevan for showing us by example. Now that's all we've got time for this week. Please don't forget to go and make your post office submission. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
And we'll see you next week.